You have the power. Stop begging like a dog. You are a child of God, not a slave. Now act like it.
I just want to say that the Defending Utah group is the inspiration behind Wasatch County naming our group Defending Wasatch Back. They came and spoke at our first protest we ever had a year ago this month on Main Street. And they inspired us to take a stand and gather together. And that's why we named our group Defending Wasatch Back.
Appreciate it. I'm a little bit concerned, though. I don't see anybody wearing a mask. Does that mean you're not either? There should be a law. So, no, seriously, we appreciate the Wasatch and the Summit County groups for putting this together, and of course, for the Steels for hosting us. This is fantastic. Really appreciate everybody's work. A little bit about what got me here. I think it's really important to see that all these different parts that people can play. I started off as just a guy that was always causing trouble in school and stuttered and failed English, and now I'm writing articles and talking. And so people, everybody can do something. And when we started, I started as a little kid kind of in the liberty movement. I was 5 years old going to county fairs with my dad for political booths. And then I grew up and I went to college and I read a book by Ezra Taft Benson called An Enemy Hath Done This. If you haven't read that, I encourage you to do so. And so I was like 22 years old, read that book, and that really started to open my eyes about what was really going on, that this wasn't just about those pesky Republicans and those pesky Democrats, that there was something much bigger going on. And so I came across a talk and became involved. I said I wanted to do more than just be the most informed person in the concentration camp. I didn't want to, right? Or just complaining about stuff and tell all the guys that you knew it was going to happen. Doesn't do us a whole lot of good. And so I was a director for all of the Western United States for a national freedom organization for about a decade. And then in 2013, we founded Defending Utah, because we realized that, if we work our tails off to get 2 senators out of 100, we work our tails off and we just have the greatest senators in America, Mitt Romney, and that's 2 votes out of 100. Or we work really hard and we get 4 congressmen out of 435. That's not going to make a whole lot of difference in trying to maintain and regain lost freedom, if that's what we're focused on. So we realized that we don't need their permission. We didn't need to wait for the federal government to tell us we can defend our liberty. We didn't need to wait for them to do the right thing. We can do the right thing right here. And we realized that we can make a bigger difference right here in our communities, and that there was something that we could do that was even more effective. And so we formed Defending Utah in an attempt. There's a saying that I like a lot, that is, education without action leads to frustration. I was reading all these things, talked about frustration earlier, right? You read about these things, but what are you going to do about it? And then there's the other extreme, is action without education leads to fanaticism. You just say, there's something wrong, I need to do something about it. When Congress wants to do something about it, usually something bad's happening. And I think that the same thing happens in general populace as well. We just want to do something and we just get suckered into the first thing that comes along. We got to be careful. And this was something that our founding fathers understood very well. Samuel Adams, the original founding father, he wanted to teach principles. He wanted to build an understanding of principles, not talking about the specific issues of taxation without representation, because there was a principle behind that issue. But he realized that teaching principles was difficult. It was harder, it took more effort, it took longer to do so, but if he didn't, then any kind of success would be short-lived, because as soon as that issue was done with, the people didn't have an increase in understanding. They were at the same position, and the new hot issue of the day would come up, and they wouldn't know why it was right or it was wrong, because they didn't understand the principles. And that's the same thing that we face today, right? When we talk about the vaccines, when we talk about the masks, those are issues, not principles. There's a principle behind both of those issues that if we understand, then we will be in a much better position, right? When the fake pandemic first hit last year, a year and a half ago, can you believe it? We came out and we said we don't care if the death rate is 100%. The government doesn't have the authority to do what it's doing. So we need to understand that. And so when you understand that, then you can put a stop to it. When the governor said you can't have 10 people meet together, what did we do? We got together, we went to the steps of the state capitol, and we had 25 people out for a picnic. When they shut down restaurants and said you can't eat out, we went to Jim's Family Restaurant, set up tables and tents, and ordered food and ate at Jim's restaurant. Okay, and when they said you couldn't have groups of people like we have tonight, we had groups of people like we had tonight, because they didn't have the authority to tell us no. We didn't wait for their permission, right? So what's the principle behind the illegal mask mandates and the illegal vaccine mandates, okay? That's what we want to be able to understand, because as hard it is to believe, the masks and the won't be around forever, I promise. Okay? The Constitution, it starts off, we the people of the United States. We the people of the United States do ordain and establish this Constitution. We established the Constitution. We formed our government. The Constitution is a delegation of authority to another group of people, to the government, to do something that we ourselves already have the right to do. Our rights come from God. We have the ability to do these things, and so if we want to be able to protect our life, liberty, and property, I don't need to ask permission to do that. But we do need, sometimes we don't want to hang out at our homes all day long and just wait there and make sure nobody steals our stuff. And so we get together and we delegate the authority to protect our life, liberty, and property. And that's when government is formed. And according to the Declaration of Independence, that is government's sole role, is to protect your life, liberty, and property. Protect it, not provide it. So now we're letting the government exercise powers they as individuals, right? We can only delegate a power that we ourselves have. If I don't have something, I can't give it away. Okay? So if the government is exercising an authority that either we haven't given them or we can't do ourselves, they are thieves and robbers. So the Founding Fathers, when we got together and we formed America, we divided up certain powers amongst three groups of people: the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary, right? We gave the power to one body of people, the ability to write laws based on certain things, but not any law. We didn't say you could write any law. We gave them enumerated powers, a list of powers. Article 1, Section 8 says, these are the things you're allowed to write laws about. Then Article 2, we have the president. We gave the executive branch certain jobs, certain authority. And then we gave the judicial powers certain job, right? So that one was able to write laws, one was able to then to execute those laws, but they were all a check on each other. They couldn't just write any law they wanted to. There was the executive branch that could veto a law or choose just not to enforce it, not to have his departments enforce those laws. And then, of course, you have the judiciary to settle disputes. And so James Madison, he recognized, right, that if these things had to be separated. James Madison, he said, the accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in the same hands, whether of one, a few, or many, and whether hereditary, self-appointed, or elective, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. It didn't matter if this guy was elected, right? Gary Herbert, Governor Cox. It doesn't matter if they were elected. If they take that power amongst themselves, they are tyrants. It doesn't matter if it's an individual taking that power. If it's a group of individuals that take that power, they are tyrants. These are separated for a reason, and we cannot allow them to be accumulated. When an executive, right, the governor or the president, issue a mask or a vaccine mandate, they are a violation of the separation of powers because the executive branch has no authority to make law. He's not in the legislature. So he's breaking the law. And he's passing what's called, the founding fathers called, pretend legislation. He's playing house. He's playing make-believe. Doesn't have the authority to do it. So an individual, right? The president and or the governor, because he's an executive, he doesn't have the authority to write law because he's not in the legislature. Does that mean that the legislature can just write whatever law they want to? No, absolutely not. Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution, specifically, the Utah Constitution has the same thing, delegates certain listed powers to Congress. What are they allowed to do? Okay? So if it's not within that, then that means that if they write a law that's not encapsulated in those powers in Article 1, Section 8, they are lawbreakers. The 10th Amendment to the Constitution, it's a part of the Constitution, it explains that even further. It reads, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people." They're reminding you. They're saying, if we didn't give Congress or the president the power to do this, they don't have the power to do it. We have to give it to them specifically. There is no broad power given to them. And James Madison, the Federalist Papers, these are the papers that were written to be able to help the colonists understand what the Constitution was all about to support it. He said that the powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Very limited amount of powers that were given to the general government. And those powers are not only few, but they were specifically listed. Easy to understand. So, Biden issued a vaccine mandate for businesses with over 100 employees. Is that legal? No. He broke the law. If you're a business with 101 employees and you don't enforce the mask mandate, are you the lawbreaker? You're the law enforcer. Herbert and Cox, they issued a mask mandate. Is that legal? No. If you refuse to enforce that, were you the lawbreaker? No, they were. They broke the law. You refused to go along with it. That means you're the one that's supporting the law. So now, it's very clear. It is really undebatable that they broke the law. They're violating their oath of office. Who stopped them, though? Do we have the legislature? Did anybody in the legislature introduce articles of impeachment? Did you have attorney general or sheriffs go arrest them for breaking the law? No. So what do you do when every level of government is either breaking the law or enabling the breaking of the law by the government? The founding fathers had a solution, right? So now the principle is if you violate a pretend legislation, you're not breaking the law, you're enforcing it. So now how do we apply this, right, with our jobs or with school? We want to give some examples from history that we can all agree on, okay? I hope we can all agree on these ones. We're all fans of the founding fathers, right? Okay? We're all fans of the war for independence, right? How about the Boston Tea Party? Are all fans of the Boston Tea Party? Okay. Well, we say that, but our history books have really told us really tell us the full story. So sometimes when we look at what really happened in history, things that we support, we don't really understand what happened. I support it, but if we were to look at, most people today were to look what the founding fathers did, most people in Utah would say the founding fathers were radical extremists. Okay, so one of the boats that's famous for being used being invaded by the Sons of Liberty was called the Dartmouth. And the Dartmouth was a ship that was built by Americans and owned by Americans. It's private property. The T on board was private property owned by a private business. The Sons of Liberty, they were made up of the cream of the crop of society. They were artisans, they were craftsmen, they were business owners, they were business professionals. So in 1773, these guys got together and they said, we're not going to allow these two ships to unload their tea, and we're not going to allow this private property to be sold in the colonies. We're not going to allow it. So they broke on board the two ships, and they threw 342 chests of tea into the harbor. Ended up being 45 tons of tea, which in today's dollars worth about $1 million. It was actually so much tea was dumped into the harbor that it started to stink, and they had to close down the harbor for several weeks until it cleared up. They meant business. They were willing to do this against private property. That was what they were fighting for, life, liberty, and property. But they realized that these families that owned this property, these two ships and the tea, were co-conspirators with a group of people working to destroy the life, liberty, and property of everybody else. And that just like a common criminal, they lost the right to their liberty. That's why we throw people in jail that break the law. And the same thing had happened with these people, and so they forfeited that right. That doesn't mean that you're against private property. You just recognize the rule of law. And so last year, Defending Utah, we organized maskless shopping. I know it's pretty controversial to go shopping without a mask. At businesses that were enforcing the government's illegal mandates. It was their private property, people would say. They weren't, they are allowed to do that. It was some controversial, and we got a lot of hate messages, a lot of hate phone calls. We were called by a lot of people biological terrorists. So when compared, though, to what the Sons of Liberty did, this was a bit mild. We could have done more. Perhaps we should have done more. But it was not a violation of these businesses' private property. These businesses are co-conspirators with an illegal government acting illegally, and they've lost the right to be able to control their life, liberty, and property in this way. And we need to understand this, because this is a principle that will help us when deciding effective action, right? When trying to stop these vaccine mandates or to stop the mask mandates and to restore liberty in general. So, remember how we celebrate the Sons of Liberty, and let's stand with those following their example today. These men were principled and they were organized. They understood natural law, right? Look at the Declaration of Independence, and it mentioned the laws of nature and of nature's God. And they weren't foolish enough to act on their own. They worked together. You didn't have one guy go on the Dartmouth and start busting up boxes of tea. That wouldn't have gone very long. They knew that they needed the help of their neighbors, which is what I see today, which is awesome. So when we think about the idea of natural law, this is a principle that's been lost to us today. We want to look at what law, where's that written down? Where's natural law written down? We don't understand that, it is. It's not like a legislation that you have to look at line 3, subsection 2, paragraph 2 to understand what natural law is, right? Natural law exists whether it's written down or not. Sir Thomas More, in his trial, he said, "Some men say the earth is flat. Some men say the earth is round. But if it is flat, could Parliament make it round? And if round, could the king's command flatten it?" No matter what law was passed, the shape of the earth would not change. The same thing goes with all natural laws. Government can try to be a robber, but it will not last. In fact, the state of Ohio, speaking of violating natural law back in the 1800s, they tried to pass a law to change the definition of a circumference of a circle, the pi, right? The definition of pi. And of course, that you can't do that, and so it didn't last very long. They had to put their heads between their legs and repent. So life, liberty, and property, right? They do not exist because of government. They exist independent of government. Whether government exists or not, you have the right to your life, your conscience, and your property. The Declaration of Independence explains that the government's role is to protect those things. So we created government and we gave them certain lists of powers. So not only are their powers limited to what we delegate to them, they are limited to the fact that we cannot delegate to them a job that we cannot do ourselves as individuals. So when we look at trying to figure out what laws are pretend legislation, does that mean that whatever I don't like, all of a sudden I can just start blasting through and start running people over and being crazy and hurting other people? Of course not. I still as an individual have to abide by natural law. I cannot violate the life, liberty, and property of somebody else. So when we look at a law, there's 3 questions we need to ask ourselves to know if that law is pretend legislation or not. The first question is the government, state or federal, authorized in their constitutions to do that thing? They write a law or a mandate. Are they authorized to do so? That's the first question we ask ourselves on any law. That's a principle. We can figure this out real quick. If the answer is no, they weren't delegated or they were specifically prohibited, then we know right off the bat it's an illegal law. Okay? The second question we ask ourselves, if I do the same thing that the government is trying to do, would I get in trouble? What if I went to you and tried to stab a needle in you? Would I get in trouble? Of course I would. That's ridiculous. Therefore, I can't delegate the power to somebody else. The third is, does obeying this law violate my personal conscience? Does obeying this law violate my personal conscience? If I were to be the one in charge of administering that law, could I do so? These 3 principles will help guide us in deciding and finding out which laws are pretend legislation and which ones should rightfully deserve our support. Okay, so now we've gone through those 3 questions. We find a law. It might be hard. We might have to dig a little while, but we might find a law that doesn't follow those principles. Okay? I'm kidding. There's lots of them. So we find, no matter what your religion is, I'm going to read something that I believe to be true. And I think no matter what religious background you have, it's a true principle. This is found in Doctrine and Covenants, section 98, starting in verse 5. Lord says, and that law of the land which is constitutional. There's a comma. It says, supporting that principle of freedom and maintaining rights and privileges. That's the definition of constitutional, is supporting the principle of maintaining rights and privileges. You just took 5 years of law school right there. Belongs to all mankind and is justifiable before me. And as to pertaining to law of man, whatsoever is more or less than this, maintaining rights and privileges, cometh of evil. And I give unto you a commandment, that ye shall forsake all evil. If we find a law that does not maintain our rights and privileges, it is evil, and we have a moral obligation to oppose that law. Brigham Young said, an exercise of power not granted in the Constitution is unlawful. John Taylor said, then do you profess to ignore the laws of the land? No, not unless they are unconstitutional. Then I would do it all the time. So now we go throughout history. This is a natural principle, which means it can be applied to any time and any place. We go to ancient Israel. Daniel was in Babylon, and a law was passed that said you had to pray only to the king of Babylon. Now, Daniel had the option, probably which most people took the choice to do, is to go hide in his closet. He says, I'm going to pray still. I'm not going to give up my God, but I'm not going to cause a ruckus. I'm going to go hide in my closet, and I'm going to pray. But Daniel did not do that. Daniel went out to the window and shouted his prayer to the one true God so that all could hear his defiance to the illegal laws of the king of Babylon. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when it was the law to worship the golden idol, did the same thing, openly rebelled against it. When the Lord's apostles, in the times of the New Testament, when the Romans passed a law saying Christianity, to be a Christian, to be a follower of the Savior was illegal, the apostles didn't say, I got to obey the law of the land. They were hung on the cross like our Savior, some of them upside down, because they would not obey the illegal laws. Now, we look at some more modern examples of that. In the 1800s, a Supreme Court ruling ruled against a law in the state of Georgia. And the state of Georgia, instead of saying, well, the Supreme Court decided, there's nothing I can do about that, they got together and they passed a law that said anybody that comes into Georgia to enforce this decree will be hung. Yes. That's the way you do it, right? But this is not just in the 1800s. Oh, that was back then. We go to today. When during the Obama administration, we have Obamacare, and the Supreme Court ruled that somewhere in the Constitution they were authorized to force you to buy something. Wouldn't the supermarket love to force you to buy certain groceries every month? But the court said that was the law of the land. That's what the Constitution said they could do. The state of Ohio didn't say, well, there's nothing we can do about it. The state of Ohio said, no, you're not authorized to do that. In the state of Ohio, you cannot enforce that. And the people in Ohio did not have to buy Obamacare insurance. In 2005, Congress passed a Gestapo-like national ID program that if you look at your Utah driver's licenses, you'll see your yellow star. And you're a part of that. But there were 21 states that got together and said, I looked in Article 1, Section 8. You guys don't have any authority to do that. And they said, we're not going to do that in our state. And so we have 21 states that have refused to be a part of that national ID program because they refuse to go along with the illegal laws. You'll have some legislators in the state of Utah say, well, that was settled with the Civil War, or that would cause a lot of problems today, that the federal government would invade. All you have to do is tell them, well, you did it. And they'd probably be like, oh, we would never, we got to obey the law of the land. The state legislature 2 years ago nullified federal marijuana law. And so if they can do it with that, if we give them enough pressure, they can do that with any of the illegal mandates and laws of the federal government we see today. They just need the backbone. We need to give it to them. So now when we forsake a law, if we do it by ourselves, it's easy for us to be picked off, right? The founding fathers were organized. They were not lone rangers. They understood the need to have organization to guide effective action. Samuel Adams started our nation's independence with a group of him and 8 of his buddies, literally. Sam Adams, 8 of his buddies got together, formed a group called the Loyal Nine. That's how come we're here today. Organized. They expanded to become the Sons of Liberty and more broadly were known as committees of safety throughout the colonies. But these committees of safety did not end with the war for independence. They continued on up until basically the Civil War between the states. But they were the last line of defense when every level of government has broken the law or has been complicit in the breaking of the law by another agency of the government. So I'm going to tell you a story that took place in the 1840s in Illinois. There was a guy, you might have heard of him, named Joseph Smith. And he was a prisoner of the local sheriff there. And the sheriff was taking him through this community. And as he was going through the community, everybody was gathering together saying, we want to hear him speak. We want to get him to hear him speak. And as they did this, the sheriff said, I wish you to understand this man is my prisoner, and I want you should disperse. You must not gather around here in this way. So what was their response? Did they disperse because they got to follow the law? The head of the committee of safety was an aged gentleman, old guy, didn't walk very well. He had a hickory walking stick. And he stood up and he pounded that hickory stick on the floor, and he said to the sheriff, "You damned infernal puke. We'll learn you to come here and interrupt gentlemen. Sit down there," pointing to a very low chair, "and sit still and don't open your head until General Smith is done speaking." You cannot kidnap men here, and if you do in Missouri, and if you attempt it here, there's a committee in this grove that will sit on your case, and sir, it is the highest tribunal in the land. It didn't say we're waiting for the Supreme Court to decide what you're allowed to do. The committees were that thing. And from its decision, there is no appeal. Because who formed the government? We the people. And in fact, this is what you do when the president, the Congress, the governor, the legislature, the attorney general, the sheriff refuses to obey the law. This is what you will do when no one in government is sticking to their delegated powers. We the people are the final arbiters of what is constitutional. James Madison said, quote, "There can be no tribunal above the people's authority to decide in the last resort whether the compact, meaning the Constitution made by them, be violated." James Madison said that we are the final arbiters of when the compact, the agreement, the contract that we made with the government, our servants, is violated, because we think this mindset that we've got into is that we have to beg them for permission, as if we were the lower creature. But we are the creator. They are the created. So is this some weird trick that gets our liberty back without sacrifice? No. No, this is hard work. There is no shortcut. We're dealing with criminals, evil criminals, and if you just all of a sudden you mail in your driver's license or stop spelling your name in all capital letters, they're not going to, oh my goodness. Well, we better give him his freedom back. He's got his name written in lowercase letters. No, that's not how that works. These people are evil, and there's no shortcut in returning our freedom back to us. The founders, what did they do? They did not write the king and the parliament a sternly written letter. They didn't mail in their driver's licenses or their citizenship records to the king and say, I'm a free man now, you can't touch me. Of course not, because they knew that there was more that had to be done. There might be something, I'm not saying that there's not something ultimately to that, but that is not the end road. That is not how you maintain your freedom. Much more to it than that. The founders offered up their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. There was no get-free-quick scheme. 5 signers were captured by the British and brutally tortured as traitors. 9 fought in the Revolutionary War and died from wounds or hardships. 2 lost their sons in the war, and 2 others had sons captured. And at least a dozen of the 56 had their homes pillaged and burned. Now, if we expect to have the same blessings of freedom that the Founding Fathers were able to achieve without paying, or at least be willing to pay the same price, we expect what never was and what never will be. If we are not at least willing to pay the same price, we will be slaves. Or we can be free. Do we actually believe our rights come from God? Do we? Yes. We say we do, but sometimes we just give it lip service. Are we faking it, saying we believe it, but our actions show something else, that we believe that government is the arbiter of our rights? This is how we decide if we've thought one thing, but actually our actions show something else. Right? If the person that accepts government as the dispenser of rights takes these are the traditional routes that are the acceptable routes, the non-controversial routes to getting back your freedom. You just got to vote harder. Right? You got to vote early and vote often. That'll get you your right back, right? We got to vote that one guy in out of 100, and all of a sudden we're going to get our rights back. We're going to write our congressman that's breaking the law a sternly written letter, and he's going to see the error of his ways. Let's see here. We're going to call the media. KSL is going to get to the bottom of this. We're going to sue the government, and sometimes this does work. But in principle, look at the principle. A burglar comes into your home and you say, oh, hold on, burglar, you're taking my stuff. Isn't that right? You ask him. He's like, oh, no, of course not. No, I have a right to your things. Of course, the burglar, the person breaking the law, is not going to tell you that he's violating your rights. Every once in a while, you might catch one off guard and be like, oh, yeah, I'm sorry, here's your stuff back. But in general, we're saying that that burglar has the authority to decide what our rights are and what our rights are not in that situation. Okay, how about petitions? Not only did we write a sternly written letter, but we got a lot of people to sign that sternly written letter. That'll show them. Initiatives, right? So all of these things, the mindset with all of these things are saying to yourself and your would-be masters that they are the arbiters. They are the ones that decide what rights you're allowed to exercise and which ones you are not. You are asking them for their permission. And because of that, they will continue to treat you the way that they've been treating you. Now, do you want to be free? Yes. Really, do you? Yes. Change your mindset. God gave you your agency, now use it. Build the understanding of yourself. Build your own understanding, making sure that you're sticking to correct principles. Build the understanding of those around you. Organize with others on these things to take principled action. Give you an example of this, right? Not everybody wants their freedom. We looked for businesses throughout the state of Utah trying to find someone, like when the restaurants were shut down, who was willing to take a stand. We found a diner called Tangie's and American Fork. They said, yeah, if you'll stand with us, we'll open up. And so when it was illegal to open, this restaurant opened up, and in 2 hours' time, it was filled with 300 individuals, maskless, eating dinner, shoulder to shoulder. What makes us different? Alexis de Tocqueville, he was a French philosopher, political philosopher, historian, and he wrote about what made America different. Why were we allowed? We were Europeans, basically just moved here. Why were we able to do something they couldn't do there? And there were three basic things that made us different, that allowed us to be able to gain our freedom when others could not. He said that the first one was that as a whole, it was hard to find somebody that didn't understand their history. He said the second thing was it was hard to find somebody that didn't have a solid grasp of the Constitution. The third thing that he said that everybody had, that it was hard to find somebody that didn't understand the doctrines of his religion. So today, it'd be hard to find somebody that knew, well, any one of those three things. But to find somebody today that understood, well, all three of those things is virtually impossible, which is why we find ourselves in the situation we're in today. So we have to take personal responsibility to build our own understanding. We need to understand the difference between education and understanding. I can understand that it takes nails, a hammer, and wood to build a house. I'm not going to be able to build that house. Same thing with liberty. So I encourage you, one tool that we've come out with, it's free. Go to defendingutah.org. It's our Liberty Boot Camp. It's a 6-course class with the videos you can watch on your own, and to be able to give you that basic understanding. So, but what I didn't come here to tell you was about some new lawsuit begging a judge to make the state or your job give you your rights. I did not come here to tell you about some politician that you have to vote for that will be 1 out of 100 in the legislature that will allow you to do what God already said you could. I came here to tell you, you can do this. You have the power. Yes. Stop begging like a dog. You are a child of God, not a slave. Now I want you to remember that. You are a child of God, not a slave. You are a child of God, not a slave. Now act like it. Those that would rule over us are criminals and need to be treated as such. So I know that we are all got here together. You guys are already part of a great thing going, and you guys want to do something. And so if you remember just one thing I say tonight, it's this. Don't do the wrong thing. Build your understanding to ensure that your actions are principled, so that the risk you take is worth the cost. So I encourage you, again, 2 things that you can do right now is to go to defendingutah.org, click on the Learn tab. We have that right there. We have sections on different things like the enemy of freedom, the natural law, the Constitution, what we're working towards, as well as we have our boot camp, which is the 6-course class. So now, while you're building your understanding, though, I encourage you to join a community of activists that have been in the battle, understand the enemy, and are actively engaged in the time-tested, proven action program. We encourage you to become a member of Defending Utah today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben.
So my name's Scotty Ariano with Defending Wasatch Back, and tonight was really exciting for us because this was a pretty big gathering. It was with Summit and Wasatch, but I think the energy was really great, especially coming off our last 4 events. We had a really big gathering on Main Street in Heber City. I'd say about maybe even close to 100 people were there, and the exciting thing was 65 to 70% of the people driving by were honking. We had very few people flip us off. It was a lot of support. And then tonight, like personally, it was really exciting. I had 6 people come that I know are interested in being a patriot or interested in freedom. They hadn't pulled the trigger, but tonight they came, and I think a lot of other people saw that.